Guys. This is about the old thyroid, the sort of stuff we get from the Ray Pete fan club and, some of the other, let's say, less than informed people out there that seem to beat the drum. Oh, if you go on a low carb diet or a carnivore diet or a keto diet, tank your thyroid, you're going to basically be in the toilet. It's going to be really bad for you. And it goes on and on and on and on and on. We've heard it all before and all that. You always have to ask them, what specifically diagnoses thyroid disorders? It's usually antibodies. There are specific things, or there could be things like iodine or selenium deficiencies, like severe deficiencies. Unlikely on a carnivore diet, but if you're, let's say, eating a lot of inappropriate stuff, you may end up having no antibody issues, but may just really don't have any energy in the tank whatsoever. But that only happens on a carb-centric diet. You won't notice it on an animal-based diet or a diet which is a keto low carb. It's primarily the consequence of being on a SAD diet or a veganerized diet and under-eating. And pretty much that's going to be the thing, and that you've got your insulin slightly higher. You can't tap into free fatty acids into fat, and that's really what happens. But it's not, looking at numbers, most numbers, and I actually explained that to a lady today, most numbers are in the, can vary. Even the so-called range is a variable thing. Every lab, different numbers. Not a lot of difference, but there is slightly difference. And those numbers, that range is determined by the sort of these sort of averages, that they've got these formulas, averages of the population. It's not a good measure. The reality is most of these people have got no idea what the real range should be, let alone that, when you're on a different diet, there are different physiological responses that your body's going to make. Being on a low carb diet, your body's going to function completely different. I'll give you an example. When your requirements for thiamine for energy production go down by 50%. So if you're utilizing either protein or fat, you need half the amount of thiamine in the system. There you go. That's a dramatic difference. It's like carbohydrates are 100% higher, the requirements for thiamine, than fat or, that range is not a small range, that's a massive range. So you can actually see that the physiology of one diet or another can be substantially different. So don't fall in the trap. And when people say, oh, these sort of arguments where they say, oh, your T3s are low, your thyroid's in the toilet and stuff like that, turn around and say to them one simple thing. Do these ranges correspond to real research? Zero research. Zero, absolutely zero. That's one thing. The second thing is, are our physiologies on different diets, do they respond differently to hormones and all sorts of things? Yes, they do. There's been ample studies now. I mean, Volker and Finney have done a lot of studies on athletes who are fat adapted in a keto state, and their T3 sort of runs slightly lower, but not as low as some low carb people that just are sedentary. Again, there's a bit more sugar in the system and their requirements are slightly higher. And so what they see in the athletes, they see a slightly higher T3 and a reduced reverse T3. But in the sedentary people, when we look at the sedentary people, we see differences. People are below the range and their reverse T3 is higher. And people go, well, Fiddy's finding this in a lab. Why am I getting this figure? Well, because you're sedentary, mate. You're sedentary. That's why. You're not actually utilising as much sugar. It's sugar that actually raises the requirements for T3, and I'll explain it, why that happens. And the last thing you want in a low carbohydrate state, if you're not generating sufficient, you don't want that higher T3 in a sedentary state because it's muscle wasting. Got it? That's what hyperthyroidism is, which, not the hypo, the low, but the high T3 in the system is what actually causes that sort of situation in that regard. So let me just share my screens. Right. So here we're looking at basically beyond the mobilization, degradation of lipids at the hepatic level, which is the liver. Thyroid hormones stimulate de novo fatty acid synthesis, de novo lipogenesis. We know what that means. You're getting, when you've got higher carbs in the system, by acting primarily on the carbs, so what is it doing is converting that stuff, so it needs more T3. So if you're eating a higher amount of carbohydrate diet, and you're not using all of it, especially if you're in a state of where you're just sitting around doing nothing, your requirements for these hormones goes up. That's the reality. Let's say we restrict the intake of food, the construct of calorie restriction. A restriction in photons, you say? Yes, the bald man will be very unhappy with that sort of language. Yes, it's hate speech in Kiwi land, especially with Ted. But calorie restrictions decrease circulating T3 concentrations. So when you're eating less, you're basically going to have less of that. I'll explain why that happens. You'll actually see. You'll get the gist of it. So there's another one of those things, thereby suggesting the reduction of muscle T3 available during caloric restriction and persisting during the catch-up fat phase. The fat phase, what does that mean? If you're not eating as much carbs, you're going to be releasing free fatty acids in the bloodstream. So the fat phase, that doesn't really require as much. I wonder why. Occurs independently of the skeletal muscle fibers composition and may involve whole skeletal muscle mass. Yes, more speculations. Okay, this is the reason why. Additional T3 increases pyruvate transport across the mitochondrial membrane and the mitochondrial biogenesis in what is called a sugar-centric system. This is about thyroid hormones and potential for regulating glucose metabolism in cardiomyocytes during insulin resistance, which is a construct of the Randle cycle, and type 2 diabetes. Okay, so to cross the membrane, you need T3. Got it? That's how it gets inside the mitochondria to do its work, so it can be oxidized and create ATP. Got it? Without T3, the carb-centric model won't work. and you'll get brain fog if and that's why people who can go on a move away from a glucose metabolism, go on a low carbohydrate diet, and feel better because now they're doing better oxidation. Got it? Remember the thiamine thing? Yeah, the requirements under beta oxidation are substantially different. Okay, the body, when you're in beta oxidation, doesn't require this as much. That is why you get the upregulation of T3. The reverse T3, because it doesn't require as much. Because what would happen, if we had too much T3 in the system? Exactly this, what happens in hypothyroidism. The disease commonly involves weakness and wasting of muscles. Weakness and wasting of muscles around the shoulders, blah, 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 blah. And it affects, respiration of the muscles, in that regard. And a lot of people on sad diets suffer this due to the Randle cycle, as a consequence of that Randle cycle and some other derangements in the system that are actually happening, which means that they're not getting enough T3 to transport what is called pyruvate, because, through glycolysis, through the GLUT4 receptor, or if you're at glucose basal level when you're fasting or in low carb, through the GLUT1 receptor, which leaves the GLUT4 receptor available for vitamin C. That's why we don't need as much. We're not competing at the receptor site. Just another one to throw in there for the other crackpots on the vitamin C issue. So you're going down through glycolysis all the way down to pyruvate, which goes into the actual matrix, which is where the Krebs cycle is, TCA, blah, 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 citric acid, whatever you want to call it, whatever floats your boat. And from there, you're going to basically, those hydrogen ions are going to be stripped and provide, whether from the pyruvate or from beta oxidation, they will basically be furnished there to be provided so you can actually create ATP. Okay? That is why you have to, and this is why, you can't read this in science or in physiology books, which are all basically reductionist nonsense. See, reductionism, that's what it is. I always say the way reductionist people think is they grab a pile of metabolic pathways and they throw them into their brain and think they know how the body works. No, you have to have an engineer's mind to think in systems, how systems work, holistic systems, and how things interact with each other. Got it? If I'm doing beta oxidation, I don't need as much. And the last thing I want is high T3 to be wasting my muscles away, like in the case of hypothyroidism, because my body's smart. It's not stupid, like the Ray Peat fan club. I mean, Ray Peat, he's criticising a diet that he doesn't even understand. He doesn't understand the physiology. Had he actually looked at the functioning of the mitochondria in a low-carb state, he would have realised, well, you don't need the levels of T3 that are required for, sugar oxidation. I'll use the word sugar because that covers all the carbohydrates, fructose, lactate, the whole lot. Sugar, they're not the same, mates. They're not the same, And that's the problem with these repeat people. They just got this reductionist mindset. They see that if you've got a reduction in that, yeah, but that's in a carb-centric model. Yes, if you do have a reduction, that's hypothyroidism. And it usually could be for a number of reasons that could be happening. One, you've stuffed your mitochondria up with a lot of deuterium, and now they don't actually function well. You may be consuming seed oils like on a sad diet, and you're causing yourself, the construct of insulin resistance, which is the Randle cycle. And so pretty much you've locked out the capacity of taking that up. You've blockaded the capacity of pulling in the glucose. So obviously the levels of, T3 are going to be affected as well, all these things. These hormones respond to the situation that's in the body. See, the body has been doing this for millions of years, unlike repeat people that think that they know best to tell the body how to regulate itself. No, the body knows that if it's got this substrate, it upregulates or downregulates this for these specific reasons. It doesn't sit around being idiotic and stupid about it. This is how ridiculous these arguments are. See, the problem is these people like to baffle you with all these scientific terminologies because they don't understand it. They can't work it out in their little brain-fogged, simplistic mind, low IQ mind. They can't, because somebody who can actually take complex things, science, and dumb it down to very simple things is because that person understands it. These guys don't. And that's why they have to use all these fancy terminologies and say, oh, T3's down. It's a disaster. I'm going to be all... Yeah, but it's a different metabolism, you twat. It's a different metabolism. So people need to understand the requirements are going to be different for a carb-centric diet and a non-carb-centric diet. So obviously, if you're hypothyroid, you've got, let's say, and that could be a consequence not only of, as a consequence of antibodies, but if you're on a carb-centric model, that could be true. But that could be at the mitochondrial level because you've either stuffed your mitochondria, you're not taking in enough, or you've done some other naughty thing like cause yourself a hypoglycemic shock. And I remember my next door neighbour, she did that. She was basically, religiously obedient, beta oxidation, doing, so obviously lower T3, had a big cheat meal. Guess what happened? She was having a hypoglycemic shock. She had locked out from the raising of insulin, locked out the ability to access fat. So what happened? It didn't have enough to transport sugar across the membrane. And two, the other thing is, couldn't access sufficient fat from fat cells. Oops. It's called a hypoglycemic shock. And the same thing happened to people like who were in Germany, the refeeding syndrome. Pretty much they were in ketosis and whatever. They gave them sugar, they blockaded that, and they basically went into a sort of a coma and died. That's called refeeding syndrome. That's why you should never, never start from going from fasting to sugar. Never. Very dangerous. And even short-term fasting, you can actually have a lot of, like brain fog and energy deficit for that reason, because, even if you're wanting to go back to a carb-centric eating pattern, you need to go slowly using more protein and a bit of fat and stuff like that, and slowly reintroduce that to allow the thyroid to ramp up T3 to provide the support at the mitochondrial membrane to transport pyruvate across, So you need extra if you're on a carb-centric model. And on the other hand, how do you resolve if you do something idiotic like that in low-carb state? Well, as I was walking out and laughing, which was funny, actually it was really funny. I actually enjoyed that. I had a good time. She wasn't very happy. And I did say to her friend, I said, if she won't swallow it, and that was what I recommended, it was cream, because she can use cream, she can use fat for energy. Got it? She may not be able to access the fat in her body, but she can use fat. So she blockaded it. She caused herself a blockade of that, but she could use fat, and she used fat, and she recovered pretty quickly, and she was fine. But I said, if you won't consume it, I'll come and help you hold it down. What a friend's for. That's all I can say. God, she was annoyed. I can't understand why. I was just trying to help. So, pretty much these are the things. So, when you've basically got high T3, which they call hypothyroidism, so it could be, sometimes there are legit reasons, it could be that you're not producing enough TSH. But if you've got normal TSH, they think it's sometimes the pituitary gland, there's some sort of things. But there is another case. And that case is that, the reasons the low carb people, we don't need as much. And that's why we convert that additional stuff to T3 to avoid having too much in the system, T3, which will cause muscle wastage. We don't want to waste our muscles now, do we? And that's why we don't want more T3 in our system when we're on a low carb diet. Once you understand in your head and you put all these, that you connect all the dots, it makes sense that the body's responding in that way, So we know that this condition causes, from excess T3, causes this problem. So why would the body be stupid enough to actually ramp up T3 and keep it in the system when it can cause this problem? No, it's going to lower it in a low carb state and convert a lot of it to reverse T3, so it can't be used for anything. So it is smart. The body's smart. It knows what it's doing. Just let it regulate the body. It's been doing it for a long time. If there was no reverse T3, I would say, fine, low carb diets are dangerous because we don't have a mechanism to regulate T3 levels, free T3 levels. But we do. It's called reverse T3. So the body is quite good at doing that, and it's not pathological. It's just a response to different energy substrates that are coming in. That's all it is. It's that simple, and you stop looking at ranges, just because you're on a low carb diet, a keto diet or carnivore diet, and your thyroid T3 levels are lower than the actual range. It's not an issue. Not an issue at all. Nothing to be concerned about. Let me just unshare that. So the take-home message, to keep it really simple for anyone, even with a low IQ like a lot of the repeat people, is that if you're if you're in a beta oxidation mode, you need less T3, and more can be dangerous. That's why the body's smart enough to remove it by using reverse T3, deactivating it. It's not that, but in a carb-centric state, you need more. And if you don't have enough, you get a whole lot of side effects, brain fog and stuff like that. That is why people feel differently, even when they actually leave a sad diet and have hypothyroidism. They feel completely different on a carb-centric model or a low-carb diet, because now they've got a new energy source which doesn't require as much of the thyroid to help them. And then eventually it also heals the thyroid. We've seen it countless times, carnivore diets healing the thyroid without any intervention. Usually a quicker way as well is combining vitamin D by getting out in the sun, improving the regulation of your immune system, and that usually deals with the antibodies over time. It takes a while, depends on how long the condition's been and stuff like that, but it usually resolves itself eventually in that regard. So the diet, vitamin D, usually fixes it. But again, you have to be very careful not to go into toxic levels with vitamin D, and if stick to about 5,000 IUs, not above that, please. not required, and only through the winter, the colder months when there's less UV around. Through the rest of the year, when there's enough sun out there, you don't need vitamin D supplements. Just get out there and get it, and it's going to give you a whole lot of other benefits, additionally being out in the sun. But this is the difference of one state, one model, and the other. Carb-centric, low carb-centric, fat-centric. They have different hormonal effects. Got it? That's the difference. They have different hormonal effects. So next time one of these crackpots tells you differently, you tell them that in a fat-centric model, we do not need to transport, via beta oxidation, because beta oxidation goes directly into acetyl-CoA. So there's no need for that transport. But to transport pyruvate into that part of the Krebs cycle, you need T3. So your requirements are different. So stop talking nonsense. That's what you tell them next time they try and push that sort of nonsensical propaganda. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this and this was very informative for you. See yous.